Hello and welcome to Learn Linux Now. I am your host Edward. This is session number 3 in which I discuss the topic of why you should use Linux. Why use Linux? And I thought this was kind of an important topic since, I'm sure there's a few out there that are asking this question. So why use Linux? Well, first and foremost, I think is one of the most important items on the list is it's free. It's completely free. There isn't a lot of things you can say these days that are free, much less an operating system. It's free to use. You can download it, install it, and use it without having to have a license key or special hardware to run it on. And I think that's just wonderful if you think about it. You can use it every day on your desktop. I do myself. Been using it for years, completely free. And now I will say there are some distributions out there that do require a contribution. One of them being Elementary OS. It's been a long time since I've used it, but they do require a contribution, but it's not like it's hundreds of dollars. You actually can name your own price if you wanted to, and I think the lowest price you can choose is like $5, which I can understand. If you think about it, you have a community of developers who are trying to maintain a distribution that requires a lot of man hours, I'm sure, some stress, and a lot of the times these developers and contributors, maintainers, they're doing this outside their full-time job. So I can understand a contribution in that situation. And again, like I said, it's not like they're requiring you to pay $100, $200. Another distribution would be Red Hat Enterprise Linux. They require you to pay what they call a subscription, which really it doesn't entitle you to well-maintained updates and security patches, and also a level of support. So that's part of their business model, which again I understand that too. But however, it is to note that as far as Red Hat is concerned, you can join their developer subscription completely free and use, I think, it's been a while, but I think it's up to 6 subscriptions, a maximum of 6 subscriptions for it to download and install their Red Hat server edition, which again, that's a pretty good price in my opinion. Free again. Another topic is that it's completely open and customizable. You can do anything you want with Linux. For example, I mentioned this in previous session. It is completely open source. You can take the Linux kernel if you wanted to, and make your own distribution if you wanted to, and that's wonderful. If you have that ability, why not? But again, as far as the customization, some examples, you can even customize, desktop environments. You can take, if you wanted to, a version of KDE or Mate or whatever, and modify it the way you want it to look. So it's a pretty awesome reason too. And as I mentioned before in previous sessions, you have choices. You have so many choices when it comes to Linux, as far as using Linux. Now, some people will say there's too many choices, which I think is kind of, in my opinion, it's kind of silly. I don't walk into a Baskin-Robbins ice cream store that's one of the major chains here in the United States. It has 31 flavors. I don't walk into this store and say, oh my gosh, there's too many flavors. I'm not going to buy here. No. I'm going to go crazy and say, oh my God, I want this version. I want this flavor. I want. And that's one thing that's wonderful about that, as far as Linux is concerned, is you have so many choices to choose from. You're not tied to one version that may or may not give you this this ability, or when I'm looking at you, Windows, Home, Pro, whatever it is they're doing these days. You're again, you have so many choices. You're not confined to one specific type of version of Linux. And that's another thing too, is I've mentioned this before, as far as distro hopping, you don't have to use just one flavor, one version of Linux. You can choose, if you wanted to, one day to use Ubuntu, or use it for a month, use it for 6 months, and then wipe your machine and use Fedora for another 6 months or whatever. You have that ability. It's also a very powerful operating system. I've been in IT for over 20 years, supporting Windows and Linux environments, and most of the time, of course, those were Windows servers. I was a Windows sysadmin for a very long time, and I can tell you from my experience, Linux is a much more powerful operating system than most of the operating systems out there, aside from Unix, of course. And now I will say that Mac operating system is pretty powerful too, and I would say that would be because of, at the core of its kernel, I believe it is based off of Unix, if I remember correctly. Matter of fact, if you use Mac OS, you can bring up a command line and run some of the same commands that you run in Linux. So that's a pretty powerful operating system too. But as a whole, I think Linux is a much more powerful operating system out there to choose. One thing also is that is not really understood, is that you can actually play video games on Linux. You can install video games on your Linux desktop and play them. Believe it or not, there's a lot of people who are not aware of that. I use Steam. Steam is one of the proxies that I use for installing video games and playing. And believe it or not, there's a large community of game developers out there who make games specifically for Linux, and Steam has a very large library to choose from. And if you want to run a a video game that's only for Windows, you can use the Proton DB compatibility layer to play a lot of Windows games. I do it quite frequently on my Fedora install. Unfortunately, of course, I'll have to mention that there are some Windows machines that you cannot, Windows games you cannot play on Linux because of a lot of the times the anti-cheat portion of that game is not at all compatible with Linux at this time. So that's, and for my case, unfortunately, I have to dual boot into a Windows install and play those games. Application availability. And something else that's misunderstood too is a lot of people think that you can't use a lot of applications on Linux. Windows alternatives, and for example, like the Office suite. That's completely untrue. There are alternatives out there that work just as well, if as the Office suite. One of which is the LibreOffice, and also OnlyOffice. I actually use OnlyOffice. As a matter of fact, this presentation that you're seeing here was created under OnlyOffice, and it's actually a wonderful choice for an Office suite alternative. However, it's not to say that you can't use the Office products on Linux. There are some versions of Office that you can run within Wine, and that's something I may mention and discuss a little bit later session, but Wine is like a compatibility layer, like an emulator, even though it says it's not an emulator, for running Windows applications and video games. So you can still run Office on your machine. However, of course, there are some proprietary software that is completely locked down that you can't run on Linux. And those, of course, would be like the Photoshop, is an example. And even on the Microsoft side, I think I tried at one time installing Visio, and I don't think you can run Visio on Linux. I'll have to revisit that. But as far as applications, there are tons of applications to choose from, and I use them on a daily basis on my desktop. Also, Linux is actually widely used for developing. There are tons of tools for developers to use within Linux. I'm not too familiar with that side of the fence as far as developing. I'm not really a developer, but as I understand it, there are a lot of developers out there who prefer to use Linux as their environment for developing and writing code. Another thing, one of the most important ones I believe, is that is extremely secure. Out of the box, Linux is a very secure operating system, and you have the ability to even lock it down even more, so it is more secure. We're in the world of Windows, and unfortunately, a lot of the times it's not really Windows' fault. I mean, I will say that you have these nefarious people who like to make viruses specifically and malware for Windows operating system, and so Windows, of course, as has always been said, has a large target on it. But it's not to say that Linux you can't get malware on it also. So if you use Linux, it is definitely recommended that you still run an antivirus, anti-malware software. And again, you'll hear about it all the time, vulnerabilities that are discovered within Linux. So it's it's not without its fault. There's no operating system that is invulnerable, but it is still a very secure operating system. It's stable. That's another thing. It's extremely stable. I can depend on my desktop to be up all the time and completely reliable, using whatever I need to do without it crashing on me. I honestly cannot think of a time in many years that my desktop has crashed on me, and even using on the server side, I really can't think of a time a Linux server has crashed on me. Now, I will say there has been scenarios where I've completed updates that I've rebooted and tried to launch the operating system and it not launch, and that's mainly because of at least in the scenario that I had, it was the incompatibility of the NVIDIA driver with the kernel that I had installed. NVIDIA driver is a little finicky on Linux, but in that scenario, all I had to do was, of course, is just reboot back into the previous kernel, and I was up and running again. But as far as stability, I don't have to worry about it crashing on me, giving me a blue screen of death, as Windows has been known in the past. And now I will say also, Windows has gotten much better over the years. It really has. I don't use it that often. Actually, I take that back. I do have to use it at work, unfortunately. I have had some crashes on my machine at work, but with using Windows 10, and actually quite frequently as of recently, unfortunately. But I can say over the years, compared to previous versions of Windows, it has gotten much better. Another thing is that it is a community-focused operating system, and the community is wonderful. Despite some outliers out there who will troll you and say some mean things about you on the forum, which it's been known. It's been one of those things that's been out there that unfortunately exist, but as a whole, about 99% of the time, most of the people you encounter in the Linux community are going to be extremely helpful and supportive. If I run into a problem, if I run into a question I need answered, I know I can rely on the community to answer my question, either from a forum or, of course, just doing a Google search. There's so much information out there using web search. Even on platforms like Discord, IRC, Telegram, Matrix, there's so many supportive Linux users out there, and and it's absolutely wonderful. And matter of fact, even just the distribution community in of itself, those who maintain the distribution or the desktop environment, are amazing. I've heard of stories where Linux users have run into a bug in a desktop environment or a software, or the operating system have notified, filed a bug with the developers, and it be fixed surprisingly within 24 hours. And I don't know that you can get that kind of support most of the time using something like Windows or Mac OS, especially if it's something really hardcore. You can expect with calling Microsoft that you're going to pay for that support, and you may not even get immediate assistance on that, and immediate fix or solution on that problem. So that's another thing about Linux, is it's a wonderful community. It's wonderful. I mean, that's all I can say about it. So I'm going to try and keep this video a little bit short. I know it's running a little bit longer than usual, but I hope you'll stay tuned for the coming sessions. As a matter of fact, if you currently use Linux, I would love to hear why you use Linux. Why do you choose to use Linux? Post on this video on YouTube, a comment on my website. Again, I would love to hear why you use Linux. But for now, I hope that you will take care of yourself and be kind.